Welcome to the Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. Thank you for coming back, especially those of you that I hear from all the time, how much you enjoy the Journey Home program, especially the interviews, of course. Thank you for your support. It's always my desire that these interviews will be an encouragement to your walk with our Lord Jesus Christ and to help you understand the beauty of His church. I also want to remind you at this moment, before I forget, that in case you didn't know, the Journey Home has a great website on EWTN.com. EWTN.com is a great place to check out anyway if you haven't done that, but to check out the Journey homepage, just keep in touch with the guests that join us on the program. You can go back and hear their stories again. You can find out who's going to be appearing in the future, and also connected with apologetic discussions and information and materials, all available on EWTN.com. So don't forget about that, and be thankful to EWTN for all the work that they do to help us all grow in our relationship with our Lord Jesus and His church. Our guests tonight are Wes and Kelly Baker, former Nazarenes. It's great to have them here. I've always loved when I hear the stories of folk who come back to the Catholic Church from particular traditions that you don't always think are open at all to the Catholic Church. It's like, whoa, they heard the church. How'd that happen? That's always exciting. Some are a little more obvious when you think about the Anglicans or maybe the High Church Lutherans. But a Nazarene coming home, it's great. So welcome both of you to the Journey Home. Kelly, Wes, it's great to have you here. Glad you made it here. There's some big storms going on. I was wondering if you were going to make it.
Yeah. We were too. Lots of flooding.
That's all right. Well, it's good to have you here. What I normally do on the program is invite the guests to take a big step back to the beginning to help the audience know where you come from spiritually. And especially when we got two of you, we've got two journeys, though you're journeyed as one, husband and wife, but still you have different backgrounds. So I'm not sure who's going to start first, but please go ahead and start from the beginning.
Sure, I'll start. I was born into a nominally Christian family. My dad was a fallen away Catholic. My mom was raised Protestant. She went to Wesleyan churches and Baptist churches and stuff when she was a kid.
Whatever was convenient.
Right, yeah. She kind of, I think in college she really liked the Southern Baptist church she went to, but neither of them were practicing when they met or when I was being raised. But they sent me to a Christian school from, the time I was 3 years old to the time I graduated, same school, this little Nazarene school. And, when I was 5, I asked Jesus into my heart, and then every night for the rest of that year I asked Jesus into my heart. I don't think it really was making a whole lot of sense to me, but, I think eventually, And then it was in 6th grade when I started asking to go to church, more because I had some friends that they were the pastor's kids, and we had fun in the children's church and stuff. I wasn't real concerned about my soul at that point, but there was some of that. And then for a little while, I went there and stuff, and then we got into the youth group, and I got really involved in youth group. I, played some music. We played guitar and did band for 4 years, and they asked me to preach every now and then at the youth. Actually, they asked us to come back a couple of times to lead retreats and stuff. But
now let me just clarify. So your landing in the Nazarene world was more by convenience and accident,
right,
than by decision.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a Nazarene school attached to Xenia First Church of the Nazarene, and so that's where the kids were going that I knew. So we just went to the Nazarene.
Now,
church.
Is it still there?
It is, yeah.
Because I know Xenia is always getting attacked by the weather.
Yeah, the tornadoes are always trying to blow us off the map, but it's still standing. Yeah.
So did you know growing up that the Nazarene tradition that you had landed in was radically similar or different than other Protestant or Christian groups?
Actually, no, because even though it was a Nazarene school, there were Baptists that taught there were Lutherans that taught there. There were very few, actually, Nazarenes that taught me when I was growing up. I remember getting, Luther's concept of, the atonement, that we're just covered with Jesus and God can't see us anymore, when I was a little guy in preschool. So I just got a really kind of a mishmash of theology growing up. So,
All right.
So I guess that gets us up to college, but that's when we converge. So maybe you should tell yours.
Yeah, I was raised in a Wesleyan church. We went there, my whole family went there, like grandparents and stuff, until I was about 13. So that's kind of what I was raised in mostly, was Wesleyan tradition. And then at that point, that's where I was baptized, was at the Wesleyan Church. And I kind of similar story to Wes. Like, I think I was maybe 7, and we had watched a video in junior church, and I was like, I want to ask Jesus into my heart. And so, like, my mom prayed the sinner's prayer with me, and I remember, like, thinking that there was literally, like, a little Jesus, like, living in my heart, because she's like, now Jesus is living in your heart. And I remember it was just like a little action figure or something. I don't know what I thought. At that age, I don't think you really understand that stuff very well. Yeah. So I went there until I was about 13, and then I think there was just kind of some political stuff going on in the church that, I mean, I wouldn't have known about at that age, but my family decided to take us to a different church, and it was a non-denominational, but I'm going to guess maybe Baptist leanings. I don't know. Non-denominational. I don't think are ever really completely non-denominational, but yeah, it was just it was like a mega church, and so we started going there, and at first we didn't really fit into the youth group very well, because at the same time my parents decided to homeschool us. So it was like we lost all of our friends from public school and all of our friends from our old church, and so then we were coming to this new church and trying to make friends, and it was just a really difficult transition, especially around the age of 13, whenever that's just like an awkward stage anyway. And so we struggled for a while. We went to the youth group, but had a really difficult time making friends, and then just decided to stop going to the youth group and just go to the main service for a while. And during that time, me and my sister and my cousin got really into music, playing music and singing, and we would travel around to just all different kinds of churches with my mom and my grandma. Usually, a lot of them were Pentecostal, just really, little tiny churches like out in the middle of nowhere, and play music and stuff. And
good
so
stuff,
we did,
though.
Yeah.
I mean, it was. You look back, probably you really enjoyed that, and the sharing of that.
Yeah, I mean, we enjoyed playing music. We never really, got into those types of churches. Like, the Pentecostal churches always kind of freaked me out a little bit, just because I wasn't so sure, I really understood everything really well with just, the super spirituality and things like that, and the speaking in tongues and stuff. I just never felt comfortable with that, and I just
the
didn't
snake
understand
handler churches are really the toughest, though.
Yeah, we never went to any of those. But yeah, so we kind of did that for a while, and then eventually we tried the youth group again, and this time fit in a lot better, made some friends, and got involved in the youth band. We had a really great youth pastor at that time, and he was really big on the idea of you can't just say you're a Christian, or you can't just say oh, faith is all I need and I don't have to do anything. He was very much no, you need to be doing acts of service, and every week he would give us an example, after the lesson, something that would fit in with the lesson. He would be something you can do this week to serve others would be this. And so I thought he was just a really, really good youth pastor. So we really enjoyed that, and that we skipped around to a lot of churches. I have a really mixed up background when it comes to churches. I was a little bit of everything.
Did you ever stick a toe in a Catholic church?
I did. It probably would have been around the time that I was 13 and the whole transition thing. The doctor that my mom worked for was Catholic, and he passed away, and so we went to his funeral mass, and that was the first time I'd ever been to a Catholic church, and I remember it being just really beautiful, and I really liked it. At that point, it wasn't oh, I want to be Catholic, but it was just kind of oh, okay, this is kind of nice.
It left a positive impression on you. And I was wondering, before we get into your college days, either of you, when you look back, I know that later in life, as the Lord continued to lead you, you were drawn closer to Him and to His church, but now looking back a little bit with hindsight for both of you, in those early younger days when you surrendered to Jesus Christ, I mean, do you see that as a real positive start for your spiritual journey, both of you?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Absolutely, and an important part of mine that I kind of passed over, but was that in high school, it was my freshman year of high school, my best friend actually died in a car accident. He was just a year ahead of me, and he had just dropped me off at the house. He was going home from my house when he went off the road, and a drunk driver hit him when he was trying to back onto the road. And that was just, it just tore everybody up. It was a tiny little Christian school. It was like a wrench went in the gears, and everything just stopped for weeks, And it was at that point that asking Jesus into my heart when I was a little guy, really kind of started hitting me. It wasn't like a fear of death or hell or anything. I was just kind of like, it's like sometimes, when I think sometimes when we suffer the most is when we're the closest to God. I think it was with Mother Teresa that used to say, right, the sufferings are kisses from Jesus. It was just like I couldn't find consolation anywhere else. I remember walking around at night all the time. I couldn't sleep, and I'd just be walking around praying because I just couldn't find any other help there. And so that was the beginning of my taking my faith seriously in my freshman year of high school. And it was that continuation there. It was the year after that I was baptized in the Nazarene church, with one of my friends, and in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. It was beautiful. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew that serious Christians got baptized, but other than that, it was beautiful. Looking back on it now, I realize the grace that we received in that baptism. It's beautiful. Sins are washed away because it's Trinitarian. It's beautiful. But yeah, definitely positive experiences of those things and good training. I had a similar, youth pastor who was very good. He took us through St. John of the Cross. We're talking about the dark night of the soul in high school.
You know what I
mean? Yeah. So
in Nazarene Church. Wow.
In Nazarene Church, yeah. He even talked about the rosary sometimes, not like just to me in private. He's like, I wonder if there's a way that we could use the rosary that would be really beneficial to us. You know what I mean? And it, obviously a misunderstanding, but really neat, pushing us to good, greater heights in holiness and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I'd say for me, I think it was a good experience for the most part. I remember specifically, it was before we left the Nazarene church. It was, I don't know, I might have been 11 or 12 or something like that. And one time, one of the classes we were talking about, I don't even remember exactly, but I just remember the verse about blasphemy being the unforgivable sin came up. And so all of us kids were like, whoa, well, we better not do that. But we didn't really know what it meant. And we're like, we asked our teacher, well, what is blasphemy? Because we don't want to do it. And they kind of tried to give us an answer, but couldn't really answer our question. And so they ended up calling the pastor, and even he couldn't really answer our question about, like, what exactly blasphemy was. And I just remember at that point kind of getting the impression that like pastors, church authority couldn't really be trusted to give me the answers about Christianity.
Oh, such an important question you kids were asking, really.
Yeah, and we just kind of felt like they really dropped the ball on that. And so the good thing about that was that I came out with the impression like, well, I need to be reading the Bible for myself, and I need to study for myself, and so that was good. Right after that, I really started getting into the Bible and stuff a lot more on my own. But yeah, definitely the downside of that was just that I kind of had this distrust of church authority, and also just this heavy burden of like, I need to know everything. Like, I need to research everything now because I need to make sure that everything I believe is right, and that people haven't
doing this particular sin that could be unforgivable.
Right.
But yeah. They can't tell me what it is. Well, I got to find out for myself what it is, and there you are.
And that's a huge weight for a kid, especially feeling like I have to read the whole Bible and make sure I get it right on my own. Like, I can't trust anybody to tell me what it means, and so that was really heavy for me. But I like I said, I got baptized in that church, but it was more of a thing where, like, my mom asked me that morning. She's like, hey, do you want to get baptized tonight? And, your friend's getting baptized. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Kind of like Wes said, like, well, I guess serious Christians get baptized. So, yeah, I want to be a serious Christian. So, I guess I'll get baptized. And they didn't give us any lessons, nothing. It was just, but still, like Wes said, like, there's still grace there. So, that's beautiful.
It's always kind of funny to me thinking back about how, because one of the things that we did harp on a lot in my school upbringing, which is funny because Nazarenes aren't really against infant baptism. technically in the Nazarene manual, you're allowed to baptize infants. Normally, they'll just do dedications.
Right.
But I was always taught, we don't ever baptize infants. They need to know what they're doing. And, the idea of a sacrament was an outward sign of inward grace, something that already happened. It wasn't like something that actually, gave grace. Mm-hmm. And so, but I was just thinking about, our own training for baptism. It was like we didn't know any more than my infant son did when he was baptized. By the time we were done being baptized, it was like, I was on the same, mental playing field as he was about what I just did,
Yeah. Well, and I was even thinking of your situation where the Lord has obviously been operating in your heart to want to be holy and to want to be able to stand before God. That was where you were, but you weren't getting helped by the authority of the church and almost left in a situation where I don't even know whether I've done the sin that can keep me out of heaven. You know what I mean? That's like, whoa, here. I mean, that could be a scary thing. So what the next step is, you two meet? Is that where you're at in your journey? What's next?
I got to the Naz before I did.
Yeah, I was there for a while. Let's see. Oh, a big thing for me was relationships with guys. I had just a lot of struggles with my boyfriends and stuff, and a lot of times I'd kind of developed this pattern that, like, every time I broke up with a boyfriend, I'd be like, all right, I'm going to be a nun. I'm not going to date anyone else. I'm just going to be a nun. And I kind of, I got into Mother Teresa and stuff, and I really enjoyed Mother Teresa's writings and stuff, and I always thought,
at the Nazarene College? Who introduced you into Mother Teresa then?
I think I was just kind of like looking for a serious Christian. I was like, oh, Mother Teresa, I mean, she seems pretty serious, so I guess I'll just read some of her stuff.
Pretty serious.
Yeah. But,
not a Catholic, but a good Christian. You're thinking of her as a Christian writer.
Yeah, just in general, somebody in the Christian sphere. And I thought, hey, Mother Teresa's pretty cool, so maybe I'll start reading her stuff. I think that was maybe just right before I went to college is when I kind of started reading her stuff, and I always liked the idea of being a missionary of charity, and every time I broke up with a boyfriend, I'd be like, yeah, I think I'm going to be a missionary of charity, but I didn't, for some reason I had this thought that, like, I could be a Protestant missionary of charity, like I didn't have to be Catholic to be a missionary of charity, so I don't know what I was thinking.
Nazarene branch of the missionaries of charity.
Yeah, so, so I kind of went through this pattern of breaking up with boyfriends and then being like, that's it, I'm going to be a nun. And then, of course I'd find another boyfriend. And so that was definitely like a point of struggle for me, was in relationships with guys and stuff. And let's see, so I would have been at the Naz for 2 years before you got there. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I remember reading a lot of Mother Teresa, and I think it's funny now because I would skip over parts like that she had wrote about Mary, because I just thought, oh, I mean, that's giving, not good attention to Mary, and so I would just kind of skip over parts in the books about that. And I remember having the thought one time, like, man, too bad Mother Teresa was Catholic. But and just I can't really think of anything super outstanding about the first 2 years at the Naz, except.
But the Naz is a good, solid Christian Nazarene school.
It
right?
is, yeah. It's Mount Vernon Nazarene University.
Yeah.
They're very,
I mean, it really has a reputation of being a good, solid, dependable Christian school.
Yeah.
Sure.
They're very Nazarene. They're very committed to the theological tradition, and
they're some really good teachers.
Absolutely, yeah.
In the religion department too.
Yeah, I mean, all across the board. Everybody I've met there has been wonderful.
Really
we don't want to give that negative.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
No, it was definitely a good time.
So when you say your first 2 years there, you weren't really drawn to the.
Not
the
to
point was you were not being drawn to the Catholic Church, but you're being fed there spiritually from a Christian perspective.
I don't know if I would say I was being fed necessarily.
Okay. So it wasn't the school's fault. What were you doing? No.
I think at that point, we were just getting really burnt out on the whole entertainment style, because I had gone to the mega church and there was very much entertainment style. I mean, I was part of the youth band, and we tried to make it like a concert. Like, we had the lights and the fog machines, and we were so cool. And I played electric guitar, and we were so cool. And so I think I was just starting to get really disillusioned with the whole feeling like it was a TV show or a concert. And at the Naz, you have to go to chapel 3 days a week. for the 4 years that you're there. And I mean, most chapels were kind of like that, just kind of the band, sort of entertainment-ish. The teachings were usually really good, but I was really getting really burnt out on like the music, especially. I just felt like it was a concert, and it was just like I got to the point where I didn't even sing anymore. I just couldn't. I just felt like it was wrong of me to sing, because I felt like, I don't know, it was just getting in the way of me really connecting with God. And so it had its good points and it had frustrating
Which is
points.
interesting, because as I envision, I mean, I've lived close to the school within an hour forever, and I've got nothing but positive views of the school. And it somehow strikes me interesting to imagine some of the Nazarenes I've known envisioning that as the kind of worship that they know is going on. You know, there's a wide range of what Nazarenes, I think, expect for worship in their church, just like we all are seeing in different churches. And I could see where's the direction that's going? Where's it taking us? Is this getting us closer to God, or is it more into entertainment? So you landed then running at Nazarene College?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. After my friend died and I started taking my faith serious, all of a sudden I had a new calling every week. I was going to be a pastor, and then I was going to be a music pastor, then I was going to be a Christian rock star, and then I was going to be a youth pastor, and then it just kept, it was like every time I got it, but I knew it was going to be some sort of pastor thing. So I really didn't even apply to any other schools. They have districts at MVNU where they will send recruiters to all the Nazarene churches, and we just got people from MVNU there so frequently that I just thought, well, I'll just go there. You know what I mean? I prayed about it and stuff, but I didn't even send a transcript anywhere else. I just went to MVNU, and I signed up for their biblical literature major was my major, or biblical studies with a biblical literature minor, or languages. Languages. Yeah, so I was going to do Greek and Hebrew and stuff like that. And but I was really ready to get out of Xenia. It was actually my senior year of high school. We had a missions class there. We took a mission class the last 2 years, the upperclassmen. We would have a whole class on missions, and then we would go and do something. Like one year we went to New York City, did some inner-city ministry, and the next year we went down for Hurricane Katrina to do some relief. But the year that we went down to do the Hurricane Katrina relief, there was a new teacher there who had been a part of the youth group. He was one of the youth leaders. And he assigned us this book called Under the Overpass. It was basically these two guys, suburban Christian Protestant kids, they just felt like it was all humdrum, and they were like, Christianity has to be about more than this. So what these guys did is they got rid of everything. They went to the thrift store, got a sleeping bag, and took their guitars, and were homeless for 6 months on different streets and urban centers. They went, from Portland to Arizona to New York City to D.C., and it was this eye-opener to me, this idea that we maybe have a responsibility to the poor as Christians. I'd never been exposed to that. I was like, the only concept I had of what it meant to be like a real serious Christian was to go get people to pray the sinner's prayer. So I used to go to the mall with witness tracts, and try to get people to, I'd stuff them in books at Barnes & Noble, and, it was just...
Catholic books?
No, not.
You just went public telling Barnes & Noble, who's been doing that all
it
over
was
the
me.
country.
I'm sorry. I know you probably got some complaints about that. Actually, one call did make it back to one of the guys. Oh, you must be stirring somebody up. But so I'd done that, but I was getting really kind of disillusioned because nobody ever responded well to that, which I can't say that I blame them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Show up and just throw them a paper. So, but I hadn't really been given any other direction. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to express my faith, and then all of a sudden there's this picture of like a radical example of Christianity. We're going to go be poor like Jesus was, and we're going to go be among the homeless, and it was just really kind of impacting to me. And then I started getting really frustrated with our local congregation, because Xenia's not really a poor town. There's not really slums, but our church was in the poorer neighborhood, and from what I could see, there weren't too many folks from that neighborhood coming to our church, and there wasn't a lot of outreach trying to feed them or help them with bills or anything like that, and we were a fairly wealthy church. And so I started getting really frustrated, and I started church hopping. I still went on Sunday mornings there because I played in the band on Sunday mornings. But on Saturday nights I was going to this, what I thought was non-denominational, but turned out to be a Southern Baptist church, but they had really good music, and it was creative. They had like cellos and accordions, and it was just very, very, it was definitely, and the preaching was really good and very solid and stuff like that. was getting really frustrated, and so I was ready to go to college because I thought, man, I'm gonna have some of this outreach possibility. I know that MVNU does a lot of really good kind of social work stuff, a lot of outreach in the area. And I got there, but I was really getting burnt out on the music stuff too. The more and more that I played up front on Sundays, because we're back, the Catholic Church, we have an altar in the center in the back, Well, there we were in the back, and we actually had been put up in front of the big stained glass window with a cross, and then all of a sudden these lights had been put up in front of you couldn't see the cross anymore. It was just like this symbolism. It was just driving me nuts. And I just got really burnt out on the music stuff. And then I got to the Naz, and it was 3 days a week of it. And it was, to me, it was better music. You know what I mean? It was the stuff that I liked more. It was definitely more guitar-driven and stuff like that, and better, But I just was getting uneasy with the concert-style stuff. And we did that for a while, and, I got into it. But I looked for a church for a long time up there. I went to all these different churches, and I just couldn't. It just all felt the same to me. Now, granted, I was going to Nazarene churches and Baptist churches, which in the area are fairly similar. I didn't try any Lutheran churches. I didn't really go anywhere else. I ended up settling in a youth correction facility ministry that we did on Sunday mornings. We led a Bible study there and stuff, and hung out with the guys, which was really good. But yeah, so I think we were kind of in the same boat. We actually met. It was the first couple of weeks of my freshman year, and we started talking about some of this stuff. But my main idea was, I was getting all frustrated about all this stuff. I was going to be a pastor, and I didn't have I was going to a Nazarene school, but I didn't have any particular desire to be a Nazarene pastor. I was going to start my own thing. You know what I mean? I was like, everybody else has got it wrong. I'm just going to go get it right. I'm so frustrated with everything I see. We're going to have creative music and good services, and we're going to care about the poor, and we're going to, and it was just, I was really humble is really what it was all about. I had all the answers. So I was going to go start my own thing, and then,
Were you with him on this, and you're thinking at the time? Or?
Yeah, I actually, now that I was thinking about it, I had stopped going to church around the time that we met, because I had started going to a Vineyard church and stuff with my family. My dad got put on a night shift on weekends, and so it was just me and my mom going. And after a while, it's just hard. Like, we were used to going as a family all the time, and so it was really hard on us. Like, all of a sudden, sometimes my mom didn't want to go because she was tired, and so then I'd have to go by myself. And it's hard going by yourself. And so eventually I wasn't feeling it there either. It's still kind of the concert style music, and so I kind of stopped going there. And then my boyfriend at the time went to a Quaker church, so I went with him sometimes with his family, and then we got involved with.
You didn't have the live bands at the Quaker church?
Yeah, I think they did.
Did they? Oh, I didn't.
It's not a traditional Quaker.
I was going to say.
No, not
real quiet.
It wasn't. Yeah. And then we got involved with Assemblies of God youth group. We did music for them.
Combination.
I know. I was I've been all over the place, and I taught a lesson there with the kids there. Just great group of kids, great people. And so that's kind of where I was. I kind of stopped going to church. I thought, I'm reading Mother Teresa. I got to go to chapel 3 days a week. That's sufficient. I don't need to go to church on Sundays. And so that's kind of where I was. And yeah, the first time we got together and we're talking about that stuff, about we just want to start our own church and make sure we're doing the right thing and caring for the poor and all this stuff. And I think we were going to try to start some sort of group, in chapel. You don't remember that? Okay. Well, we were thinking about starting something on campus that would be
I do remember that.
You remember you said something about we'd have artwork set up if people want to come in and paint pictures, or if people just need to rest, we could have pillows, and we had all these big plans for our crazy perfect ministry, of course.
Well, and then
I was going to say, why don't we take a break?
Sure.
Time for a break. Because I do think what you're expressing is what I think is fascinating, because we're seeing it more and more and more today. Mm-hmm. But people just want to do their own thing because they often are frustrated with what they've experienced. Yeah. So they're reacting against what they've experienced and the shortcomings of what they've experienced. The question is, do they ever actually touch the real thing?
Yeah.
And that's what you're going to talk about in a moment. So let's come back. We'll see Wes and Kelly Baker in just a moment. Welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guests tonight are Wes and Kelly Baker, former Nazarenes. He told me during the break, okay, here we are right at the stage of some stuff really starts to kicking in. So what happens?
Well, another person that I met freshman year who has been important in my life up to today was a guy named Tyler DeLong. I remember I saw him the first couple of weeks of college. He had an enormous beard, and had big gauged ears, and tattoos all over his arms. I'm like, this guy looks crazy. What is he doing on this campus? You know what I mean? Because the Nazarenes aren't really, you know what I mean? No drinking, no smoking, no dancing with girls, nothing. You know, it's very, so to see a guy like that is not common. Yeah. Well, he invites us, a couple of weeks into the semester, he and I got to talking and hanging out a little bit, and he invited us to go see this band that he and his fiancée at the time, now wife, really enjoyed. They were called the Salters. And so we went up to Mansfield, which is 40 minutes away, and we drove up there to see these guys who we'd never really heard before. And it was a pretty incredible experience. These guys, they're actually an intentional community. I think they're kind of loosely rooted in the Mennonite church. But they basically all got rid of everything, and they moved onto this big black school bus that they converted to run on veggie oil. And they got a trailer that they tow their music in, and they put bunks in there and everything. So they just live on this bus. And there was about 10 of them at the time. And they made most of their instruments. They played this really beautiful, it's very passionate. They draw influences from oppressed cultures. They actually go, they went to Eastern Europe. They spent some time in Kurdistan among orphans and things like that in New York City and stuff. And they learn these musical backgrounds, and they kind of write their music about that. Well, they played, and it was incredible. We keep talking about wanting to find these examples of serious Christians, and people are really trying to live out the gospel. And all of a sudden, there are these guys, with beards and dreads, and they smelled really bad because they lived on a bus and they didn't take showers, and they're real grimy. But they were so. It was the neatest thing was to see their eyes, because they weren't. If you saw them, it was a very passionate and emotional experience, but they weren't performers. A lot of these guys wouldn't make eye contact with anybody. They're standing still. They're looking up. It's just. But you could tell that they're really playing music for God. Is what they're. I mean, that's the idea behind what they're doing. And afterward, we got to talk to them some, and there was just incredible peace in their eyes, and it was like, I want that. You know what I mean? And I realized to some degree we didn't get to talk to them as much as Tyler and Holly did, but the peace that they had was connected to the poverty that they had embraced, that they had given up things that were getting in the way of their relationships with Christ. Well, while we were there was another group that was playing with them that were very similar. It was actually a husband and wife, and they played medieval Celtic instruments that they made, what a doodlesock, right? It was like a German bagpipe that he made. It was incredible. They were really neat folks, too. Well, they were selling this book called The Irresistible Revolution, and we picked one up for $10, and we read it, and it was kind of mind-blowing. Because this guy had a similar story to us. He was from Tennessee, and he basically grown up very, conservative, I think Methodist, I don't know.
Something like that.
But by the end of, the time he was in college, somebody kind of confronted him with the Sermon on the Mount. And they said, if Jesus meant what he said, then that needs to impact the way that we live. And so he went on a search for a real Christian. He kind of got disoriented, and he ended up actually working with Mother Teresa in the leper colonies for a summer in Calcutta. And he comes back, and then they long story short, he does a lot of really radical things. He goes out, and he's kind of endangering himself. At one point, he went with a Christian peacemaker team to Iraq, right when the war was starting, to try to bring peace without, violence and stuff. And he was there when bombs were dropping, and he's talking to these kids and stuff like that. And it was just a very, somebody who is passionate enough to do that because of his relationship with Jesus was impacting to us. And what he did is he and a bunch of his friends from college, they went to some college on the East Coast where Tony Campolo was teaching. And they started, they just moved into a common house together, and they called themselves A Simple Way. And they've been doing it for 16 or 17 years. And he and a number of other people have been doing similar things around the country, and it's kind of started this movement called the New Monasticism. I don't know if you're familiar with this at all. But essentially, it's an ecumenical movement. So there are actually Catholics involved in it, but there are Mennonites and Quakers but predominantly it's evangelical Protestants. And they're reading people like St. Benedict of Nursia. They're reading the Rule of St. Benedict. They're reading the Desert Fathers. They're reading St. Teresa of Avila, St. Francis of Assisi. And they're kind of drawing on what they call old monasticism, old monastic practices, and they're trying to apply it to their own lives. and they're living in community in different respects. Some people share a house, some people live in a neighborhood, and they're working with the poor primarily. It's very focused on the corporal works of mercy. And so we see this, and we're like, man, we could do this. These guys did it right out of college. We're in college, and so...
Now, were you married yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, okay.
We weren't even engaged at this point.
Yeah, we weren't engaged yet.
But and then Tyler and Holly were getting really into it. Another one of our friends, Josh, who lived on the same floor as Tyler did, we're all getting really into this idea of the new monasticism, and we start dreaming like, man, we could be a new monastic community, Well, but during this time, a lot of what was happening with us was this desire to work with the poor. And so we started working at a homeless shelter in Mansfield and playing with kids. Well, we started organizing the food shelf. And then they got used to us, and the mothers would let us take their kids down to play at the playground behind it. And the kids, oh my gosh, just
awesome.
beautiful, beautiful kids. They're fantastic. They wanted us to read to them and play games and stuff, and rap for us occasionally, which was always interesting to hear a 4-year-old rap to you. And we worked at a Salvation Army ministry in Mount Vernon with troubled teens called The Harbor. And got involved in a couple of these, works of mercy kind of things. But more and more, I felt troubled in my conscience about going to school. I felt like I just didn't feel like it was okay for me to be doing school full-time and doing ministry or works of mercy part-time. And so by the end of freshman year, I kind of quit doing homework. I was all done with this stuff. And I kind of unofficially dropped out after freshman year. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't do the paperwork or anything, which was providential.
Yeah.
But I was just like, you know what? We need to go do something else. And you did too, right? Junior year.
After junior year, same thing. I kind of thought, I'm tired of not being able to do ministry like I want. And yeah, so both of us kind of decided we're dropping out of school. Like, we didn't really tell anybody that, but...
Yeah. I did.
Oh, okay. But, and we just thought, what was our plan? We were going to buy a trailer to hook up to our car, or we were going to get married first, obviously. Yeah. And then we were just going to drive around the U.S. and just do ministry.
Serve
just
the Lord.
Yeah, kind of like the Psalters, Actually, we thought about joining them for a while.
Yeah, we did think about it.
Maybe I'll learn how to play banjo and then I can get in there. So what we did is, I told you, one of those mission classes we went to New York, and we worked with, it's called Children's Bible Fellowship. It's a parachurch, conservative evangelical camp that's right outside of New York City. And so I called them up, and we just went to work with them for the summer, basically. I worked with a fella that we took youth groups from all over the country into the city to do short-term mission trips. And then Kelly worked as a hostess for the handicap section of the camp for the summer. And was it exhausting? Oh my gosh. I worked 80 hours a week with one day off, and it was just, it was neat, but it was just, we were just exhausted. And we were engaged when we came to New York. And we were planning on getting married afterward, but we ended up getting married at the camp while we were there, and having a wedding celebration when we got back for our family and stuff, which has a good and bad things. But
still, at this point, you're really living the apostolic virtues, trying to live in that way, but no thought yet to the Catholic.
It's coming. Okay. It's close. Okay. We're close.
Yeah, we kind of started being influenced by it. Because we went to the Englewood conference.
Yeah. So right before we went to New York was this new monastic conference that we found out about in Indianapolis, which isn't too terribly far from where we were. And so we shoot over there for a weekend, and we met. It was actually really neat. The Salters were there, and we met a bunch of people that we're still very close friends with. And while we're there, see, I had been, I was on this road of I'm going to start my own church because everything else is wrong. Well, these guys get up there, and they're some of the bigger names in the new monasticism. It wasn't the fellow that wrote that book, but some other guys that had written big books. And they're talking about, they have, they understand that desire for people to want to go and kind of break ties with denominations because they are frustrated with A, B, or C that's going on. But they're saying but that concerns us because then you lose the boundaries between you and heresy. You could go off the theological deep end if you don't have those boundaries. Right. So these guys start really stressing roots. We need to be rooted in some sort of theological tradition. They weren't really pushing any particular one. A lot of them had Mennonite leanings. They really had a great affinity for the peace churches. There is a very pacifist movement. But they didn't, a lot of them were still, they basically, I think the idea was you stay in the church that you are in currently and try to work for change within that church. And you find roots there and stuff. Well, because it's new monasticism and they're drawing so much off of old monasticism, they have a lot of resources from the old monasticism. So while we're there, we picked up a book of the Sayings of the Desert Fathers and The Way of Perfection by St. Teresa of Avila. And I wanted to learn how to pray. I figured, better to teach you, right? So, for like $4 too, which is fantastic. Then we ship off to New York for this camp. And right before we left for camp, my dad, who had been raised Catholic, but he didn't really ever join a different church. He came to the Nazarene church with his son, but he just was never comfortable. It's like he never was not Catholic. He just wasn't practicing his Catholic faith. Well, he gave me something right before we left. It was one of the few things that he had left of his father, was his father's rosary. And we talked a little bit about it, and he kind of talked to me through the praying to the saints and praying to Mary. It's like, they're not God. The saints aren't God, and Mary's not God, and we don't think that they are. It's like asking you to pray for me, but they're just better at it. You know what I mean? They don't have anything else to do all day. They're in front of God face to face. So, and so he taught me the Hail Marys and the Our Father, and he couldn't really remember everything about the rosary, so I had to look a few things up on the internet. So he gave me this rosary, and so then we go to this camp, and all of a sudden I'm praying the rosary every day. I'm walking around camp, because it had 180 acres of woods, and we lived on one far end of the camp. And so while I'm walking to breakfast every morning, I'm praying my rosary beads, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was making the sign of the cross after every Hail Mary, making sure nobody's seeing me, And so, we're going through there, and then the camp started out really neat, and then it progressively got more frustrating as the camp went on. We did a lot of handing out the tracts, which I told you I was really disillusioned with, and there was this one thing. My favorite day was the tourist day, not because of the tourist stuff, because I saw that every week. But one of the parts of it was we got to go to Tompkins Square Park, which is where a bunch of homeless folks hang out, and we hand out bag lunches and just get to hang out with them. We never spent a whole lot of time there because most of these kids were from rural churches or suburban churches and had never seen anything like urban homelessness, so they were shaking in their boots, and my boss didn't want to traumatize them, you know what I mean? So we hand out lunch, talk for a little bit. But one of the things we did immediately after that was in Harlem, we did what was called drive-by evangelism. Okay, that should send up some red flags. Don't you think? Drive-by evangelism. So basically, you hand each of the kids a big stack of tracts. You let them off on a block. You tell them to hand out as many tracts as you can and get back on the bus. And you do it a couple of times. But they were given instructions that if anybody wants to talk to you about the gospel or anything, tell them, I don't have time to talk. Call the number on the back of this tract, And it was just like, it was blowing my mind. I'm like, we're just littering at this point, you know what I mean? That's how I felt. And, I remember one time I got off and I felt really obligated. I normally would get off and I would just pray for people because I just didn't feel comfortable doing the tracts and stuff. So I got off one time and my buddy got off with me and I felt like I should hand one out and I tried and then I almost threw up spontaneously. I just stopped and I just, And so I think one time when we were at camp, we kind of skipped out and we went to Mass one time, and we didn't have any idea what we were doing. Yeah. and part of it, one of my uncles had been the last practicing Catholic in the family, and he had died very valiantly, and that had really impacted me because I hadn't seen a whole lot of people face death. Like my friend had died, but that was immediate. He wasn't really approaching it. And that had gotten me curious about it, and particularly about like family history and stuff as well. And so we went to Mass there.
You both went.
Yeah, we both went together.
And we didn't know how to use the missalette or anything, so we just sat in the back and listened to everything. And the only prayer I knew was the Our Father. So we said that, And so toward the end of the camp experience, we didn't know what we were going to do. And we found out we could go back to college for very cheaply. And our friends, Tyler and Holly, called us and said, hey, there's a house here that we could live in for $200 a month. And we could do one of these new monastic communities. So we all move in together and start, trying to live life together. And that lasted about 6 months that we were there with them. And it was really great. It was really difficult. And we'd split up, you know what I mean? But while we came back, we started going to St. Vincent's in Mount Vernon. Yeah. And I remember the first Mass we went to was officiated by a retired Monsignor Wolf. He must have been in his high 80s or low 90s. And it was the most incredible experience of my life because there was no band up front. There was one organist hidden in the back. And there was an elderly lady doing the canting, and that was all the music. And there was no concert, and there was all this silence, and there was all this beautiful artwork. And there was this beautiful, wise, old priest giving these homilies from, 70 years ago when he was a kid. You remember things, and it was like every Sunday, I learned something. Like, it was like this flash in my mind about the readings from the day, the scriptures. I was like, I never thought about that before. The way that this guy would tie things together was just incredible. And so we kept going, and I got cold feet a little bit into it, particularly because of Mary. I just, the Nazarene church that I went to and the school I went to was very anti-Catholic. I remember being very concerned about my family that was
usually
Catholic.
That means always pointing out the Marian issues.
Yeah, they worship Mary, and they don't care. They can't pray straight to God. They have to go through a priest or go through Mary or go through the Pope. But Kelly kind of talked me off the ledge and said, hey, we need to stay here.
You were being drawn then yourself then?
Yeah, I think at that point, we had talked about like the roots and stuff, and I just felt like I just don't want to keep trying to find a church. Like, I like it here, we like the silence, we like the liturgy and stuff, and I was like, I just don't really want to try to find another place. Like, and I think I asked Wes, I'm like, well, where would you want to go? Because, like, what other place has what we found here? And I think you suggested maybe
the Episcopal
Church or something like that.
Yeah, I knew the form was similar.
I was just like, no, I mean, and like I told him, like, you know what, Wes, no church is perfect. Like, there's always going to be flaws that you find, like, in the people or whatever, and at some point we just need to get over that. Like, this is the best place we've been to, and I don't want to leave it, and we just found so much beauty there, and so I think I was drawn, maybe not necessarily like I want to be Catholic, but just I want to go here.
From your experience, the way the Lord had led you in your life, this was it. Did you have to deal with any of the doctrinal issues as you were, like Mary's one that you're confronting?
Right. Yeah, and we did, but we actually we went to Mass for a year before we even knew about RCIA. Well, that's not true. We heard about it, but it was like right when we started, it was RCIA was starting. We were not ready to commit to this. We just started going to Mass. So we went, and we knew enough not to receive the Eucharist, but we didn't know what the church taught about the Eucharist. We didn't know. I knew what my dad had told me about Mary and the saints and stuff, and I kept having to kind of confront that. And we had a mentor who actually used to be a teacher at the Naz, who was starting RCIA that year, and he converted to the Catholic Church, and he helped us through a lot of stuff. He gave us Jesus and Mary by Henry Nouwen, and that to me was like, man, okay, I can do that. I can handle that. He was able to put it in a way that I understood Mary's role a little bit to where it wasn't giving me the creeps, And so we did that, and the next fall we started RCIA, and we went through it, and I had, we had a lot of things that we weren't sure about, and a lot of things we just were totally ignorant about. But it was like all the things that we didn't understand or I had a problem with as Protestants turned out to be it was a misunderstanding. Like purgatory, I thought that was like a third option. You know what I mean? Like there's heaven, there's hell, and there's purgatory out here that I don't understand. But then when they explain, you're like, that's a purification. That's getting us ready for heaven. I was like, okay, I can deal with that. That's fine. I'm all right with that. And the more I learned about Mary and her role, the more I was endeared to her. I went from this place of like almost running away from Mass because of Mary to like, now I go to a Protestant church and I just feel like this place doesn't have a mother, and it makes me sad to know that they don't know Mary, they don't know her mother. Trying to think, but it was the Eucharist that was the anchor. I have to say that 100%, because I remember wrestling with it, and our catechist Greg told us in one of the interviews. He said, I just told him, I said, man, I want to believe it, but this is really weird for me because Nazarenes is like a pure symbol. This is just a reminder, and they're little individual cups of grape juice and wafers and stuff. And so he's like, well, just read John 6. And I read that, and my jaw dropped, and I was like, I've read the Bible. How did I miss this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, this is pretty clear.
Yeah.
And it was when that sunk in. I realized that even though I didn't understand everything at that point, like, there was nowhere else to go. I had been convinced that was Jesus in the Eucharist. That was literally his body and blood, soul and divinity. And that there was no other church that I even knew of that claimed that. There was nowhere else I could have that intimacy with Jesus in the Eucharist, to receive him, into my very flesh, to feed my soul. And I just knew that, like, there's nowhere else. Like if there's other hurdles that we have to overcome, and there have been. It's been a process. Even after our confirmation, there are things that I've had to work through and understand and submit myself, humbly to the church's teaching, things that I didn't understand sometimes. But I knew that there's nowhere else for me because of the Eucharist. There's nothing. I mean, there's nowhere else I could go to get that.
Yeah.
Well, what comes to my mind now, I mean, there's a bazillion things I'd love to talk to you about, but time flies.
Right.
But the thing that gets me is that long ago, though, in both of you, the Lord had planted a seed in your hearts for service.
Mm-hmm.
And now that you're home, do you still see ways in which you're going to continue to use that desire for service now that you're in the church?
Oh, absolutely. That was something that was wonderful to us, was to hear that that was one of the best things for me, was understanding we need both faith and works. Mm-hmm. That to me was like, of course, that's what I've been thinking this whole time, and the church teaches it. And it's not that we earn our way to heaven. It's all through grace, but we need to respond to that grace with faith and works. And some of those works are the works of mercy, the spiritual and corporal. We need to take care of the poor. We need to take care of the unborn. We need to take care of the sinners too, the ignorant. We need to instruct them. And I was like, oh, it was the most beautiful thing. And to read like, St. Francis and Mother Teresa and these examples of people who are pouring themselves out for Jesus and the poor was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful.
Well, especially even the church's commitment to the pro-life issues. I mean, to some extent, my guess is that was on the same page where you were before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Very strong pro-life stuff from the Nazarenes and everywhere I went, Protestant stuff.
Well, I'm wondering, let's just assume there might be a Nazarene watching the show. Would you like to say something to them on why they ought to consider coming to this church, which they probably never thought of and ever entering?
Well, I think the first thing is you're not alone.
Yeah.
Because there's actually 5 kids from the Naz this year at St. Vincent's going through RCIA.
Wow,
we know one nun that graduated from there, 2 nuns that graduated from there, and a priest who graduated from the Naz. So there's a Nazarene wave coming on in. I think the other thing is just to stress humility. The humility to seek truth. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes we get so caught up in what we think is right that we're not willing to examine another position. But like I said, every time that we examined one of the church's teachings that we thought was totally false, it made perfect sense, and it was harmonized in the scriptures and the church fathers, and there's a consistent teaching. Mm-hmm. And it was like, just seek truth, because the truth, will set you free, right?
Yeah.
It will set you free to examine, to love God more. I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing that we've found, just coming from the background of the new monastic movement. There's a lot of really good stuff going on with what they're doing, but we just found so much more like holistic examples in the Catholic Church, and so we just kind of felt like we could just kind of move from that into the Catholic faith just kind of seamlessly. Like it made sense, and it fit so much better in the Catholic Church because there's actually 2,000 years to back up everything instead of 20, or I don't know how long this movement's been lasting, but yeah, to feel that connection and that depth into the history of the church, and it's just this church has always taught that. It's not some new idea, and so that was really beautiful.
And I was going to say the point that one speaker made that you mentioned about the rootedness to keep you from being just one step away from some heresy you don't even realize.
Right.
I was even thinking of your childhood where you don't even know whether I've committed the unforgivable sin or not.
Right.
Well, if you don't have the rootedness to help you understand what's true and what's right and what's pure, and you're left on your own.
Yeah. That was, the roots for me was huge. Because I kind of swing from extremes. Like if somebody tells me to go back to the roots and I'm convinced to go back to roots, I'm going all the way back. And that's the Catholic Church. It's all the way, I needed something with more than 200 years of history. Yeah. So.
Well, listen, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your journey on the program, and our prayers are with both of you as you are to confirm that commitment of yours to take your faith and serve those out there that most need it and most need to hear it, and that we need to share what we've been given to the less in the world. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly and Wes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Journey Home. They're an inspiration for all of us to take our faith seriously, to make sure we're not drawn off in all the other voices that are out there, but to make sure we're truly rooted in Jesus Christ and his church. God bless you. See you next week.